This morning we're to our fifth week into, actually it's our sixth week into this series covering the 10 Commandments. And what we've been doing every week is we've been going through and reciting in order the 10 Commandments. And so that by the time we get to the end of this series, you should hopefully be able to recite them by memory, and they will stick with you. So let's go ahead and recite those together as we do every week. Commandment number 1, you shall have no other gods. Now, I was a little loud on that, or else you're just not being very, very loud. Command number 2, you shall not make for yourself a graven image. Command number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. Number 6, you shall not kill. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. Number 8, you shall not steal. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And number 10, you shall not covet. There was a woman who was out walking with her 4-year-old daughter one day, and the little girl, like a lot of kids do, picked up something that she saw on the ground, and she proceeded to put it in her mouth. And the mother kind of freaked out. Are any of you germ freaks in here? Especially when you see your kids put something in their mouth. And I could just about imagine this lady say, "Oh, stop, don't put that in your mouth, because it's dirty." And the little girl said, why? Well, it's dirty, it's filthy. You don't know where it's been. It's full of germs. And the little girl was amazed at the knowledge that her mother possessed on germs. She was amazed that her mother would know this type of information. And she said, "Wow, Mommy, how did you learn that you know so much about this type of thing?" And the mother, just kind of playing along with her daughter, says, "Well, that's what mommies learn. That's on the mommy test that we all have to take and we all have to pass. If we don't pass that test, we can't become mommies." And the little girl, as they walked along a little bit, she was somewhat puzzled by that, and she looks up at the mother after some time to reflect, and all excited, she goes, "Oh, I understand. If you don't pass the test, then that means you have to become a daddy." And she says, "Yes, that's right. I would have to become a daddy if I don't pass the test." I don't think that story is a bit funny. I mean, where's the respect? And just a side note, and this really bugs me. In fact, Caleb made this observation the other day when we went to a department store. Why is it that 90% of the store is all women as far as clothing and items? And you have this one little section way back in the corner where you can't even see it. That's reserved for men stuff and items. I mean, what is up with that? That's discrimination, I think. I mean, I don't know. I never understood that. But anyhow, respect. Where is the respect for the men and the fathers and all that other thing? Well, today's message is about honor and respect, namely the authorities that God places over us in our lives. Honor, giving honor and respect. It says in the 5th commandment in Exodus 20, verse 12, honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land of the Lord your God, that the Lord your God is giving you. If you're taking notes this morning, we need to hear this principle, that we cannot survive as a society without respect for those who have authority over us. Let me repeat that. We cannot survive as a society without respect and honor for those who have authority over us. Listen to what the Apostle Paul writes in Romans chapter 13. He says, everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist, whether they are governmental authorities or parental authorities or what have you, the authorities that exist, all the authorities that exist, have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves, for the rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one authority? Then do what is right, and he will commend you. For he is God's servant to you to do good. He is God's servant to do good, to do you good, But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant, an agent of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also because of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give everyone what you owe him. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. You know, it's not rocket science. It's not rocket science that our prisons and jails are full of individuals who somewhere along the line have shown little or, if any, respect for the authorities and the laws that govern our societies. And as today's command is directly related to the first human authority, that is the authority of the home, the father and the mother, we feel the adverse and the unfavorable effects when there is a breakdown and disregard for the authority that God has established within the human home, within the authority that God created to be foundational to all other authorities, the home. A survey of 180 rapists, those who are in jail for rape, 108 in this survey that were surveyed and interviewed, 60% came from single-parent homes. 70% of those describable as violent crimes, committing violent crimes, came from single-parent homes. 80% of those motivated by displaced anger came from single-parent homes. According to another study that showed that over half, that is 53%, of the inmates of state correctional facilities had grown up without the benefits of a two-parent home. Now, don't get me wrong, because I know some of you who are here today, you're single parents, and it's not an easy road. This is not to put fear in those who may be a part of a single-parent home, but it is to illustrate the crucial role between the parent-child relationship and how that can have a direct impact upon society. And so often, unfortunately, it's a negative impact. Not in all cases, but at least that are reflected in the statistics that I just shared. We cannot survive as a society without respect for those who have authority over us, without the ability and the know-how and the knowledge to show honor and reverence and respect. But here's the next point that I want us to write down. The home is the training ground where we learn how to live under authority. It is in the home. Now, speaking of authority, there was a little sign earlier. No, I won't go in there. Muting cell phones. I'm kidding. Don't feel bad. The home is a training ground where we learn how to live under authority. In fact, the home is, if you will, the starting block. How many of you have run track and you start, or at least you're familiar with track, and you started off, when you start off in a sprint, you start off with a starting block. The home is the starting block by which we begin this race called life and living in society. I'm always telling my kids, how the things that you learn here as a child is going to be reflective and directly related to how you relate to society when you get out on your own. If you have a problem with my authority now, and if you don't learn how to listen to me, your parent, the one who has authority over you, has been placed in authority over you, then how are you going to handle it in the workplace? When someone else who has been placed in authority over you tries to give you instructions, how are you going to handle it? So how you handle this in the home, this is the training ground. This is the starting block for how you live under authority. In Jewish law, this was such a serious principle that the sternest penalties were threatened against the persons who broke this commandment. In fact, it says in both Leviticus 20 and Exodus 21, the same, almost identical verse. It says this: everyone who curses his father or mother shall be, say that with me, put to death. Andre's right. Everyone who curses his father or mother shall be put to death. That was according to the Jewish law in the Old Testament. But, that same sentiment did not wander off too far from that same thought in the New Testament. Even the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1 said this, in this whole list of all these issues in society dealing with man's depravity and how far man has gone away from God. Paul lists this in the midst of all this, in characterizing those persons who are estranged from God and in rebellion against God. It's this statement that's in the midst of all of these other statements. They disobey their parents. They disobey their parents. And then he follows up just shortly after that. And those who do such things, speaking of all these other things, and disobedience to parents was one of them, those who do such things deserve death. Now, in context, I don't think Paul is necessarily saying that society ought to start putting kids on death row if they get caught disobeying their parents. I don't think that's what Paul is pushing for. But I think he spoke of what we certainly most deserve in the eyes of God, and what could ultimately happen when we disregard authority, right? Now, I've told this before, and maybe my mom remembers. You remember, Mom, one time, I don't know how old I was, maybe I was 3 or something like that, I don't know. But did I get to wandering onto a railroad track? Now, my mom didn't spank me very often, and some of you are saying, well, she should have. But that day she spanked me good, and I remember that part. Well, not until later on in life, at least. But it could literally, when I don't learn to obey, when I don't learn to submit to the authority that is put on, it could literally be a life and death situation. You know the statement, don't bite the hand that feeds you? You ever heard that statement, don't bite the hand that feeds you? Well, what happens if you keep biting that hand that feeds you? You starve. And you ultimately die, right? It was viewed with such seriousness also because of the principle that all authority is established by God. You rebel against any authority, you rebel against the authority of God himself. You disobey your parent. You are not merely just disobeying your parent, you are in rebellion against God. You disobey the laws of the land. You're not merely disobeying the laws of the land, you're disobeying God, according to Romans 13, where we read just earlier. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. The commandment to honor father and mother comes directly after the commandment which lay down our duty to God, if we want to take note of that. And the penalty for breaking the commandment is the same as penalty for blasphemy against God. Those first 4 commandments dealing with our relationship and our response, how we live in relation to God, is directly followed with honor your father and your mother. And they have the same consequences if we don't respect those same commands. The Greeks and the Romans were just as certain as the Jews that honor and respect for the parent was paramount. In Plato, the philosopher Plato, in his writings Laws, entitled Laws, he writes of the honor that must be paid to the parent. It comes second only to the honor that must be paid to the gods. In fact, Rome, as many of you might be aware, Romans had what they called the power of the father, that said that the Roman father had power over his son his entire life. It didn't matter, 18, how we all get, as soon as we turn 18, it's like, hey, I'm 18, I'm an adult. I can go do what I want now. I did that. But if I was a Roman son living in Rome, I'm 18, doesn't make any difference. I'm 35, it doesn't make any difference. I'm 50, doesn't make any difference. Because according to Roman law, your father has power over your life, your entire life, as long as he lives. In fact, it wasn't just that he had power over you, he could do with you what he wanted. It didn't matter if you were a son and you held political office, you did what your father said. He could kill you if he wanted to. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying we need to start adhering to those type of laws, but I'm saying the way it was, the way society viewed the relationship, this thing of honor and respect to the parents. Honor your father and your mother. This is foundational to society. This is the first building block of a peaceful society, respect and honor in our human relationships. But Christianity, I want us to note that Christianity brings to light a deeper meaning behind the fifth commandment. I call it the boomerang effect. The boomerang effect. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. It says, you can't expect it to come back to you unless it first comes from you. You can't expect it to come back to you unless it first comes from you. In the New Testament, Paul begins to repeat again this commandment. In the Old Testament, Paul begins to repeat in Ephesians 6. He says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. In fact, he quotes directly from Exodus 20. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. What is the promise? This is what happens when you learn to respect the authority that is over you, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. And so, children, it goes out. You throw that, what is a boomerang? It's this long object, crooked object, and you throw it, and it's shaped in such a way that it will come back. But unlike the command in the Old Testament, Paul adds another dimension to this command. He gives it a little bit deeper significance. You see, the burden is not merely on the child to obey, much like the Roman law. You obey your father no matter what. He can beat you, he can abuse you. It doesn't matter. You obey your father. He could kill you. But in Christian thought, Paul is very careful to bring another dimension. And he says this in verse 4. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. The weight of responsibility is just as great, if not greater, upon the parent. But he goes on to say, he expands this beyond the child-parent relationship. He begins to mention other relationships. In Colossians, he starts to talk about, in verse 19 of Colossians 3, wives, submit to your husbands. We don't like that word, especially in the context of wives and husbands. Because, why? Because quite frankly, down through the years, down through the centuries, it's been abused. You had a husband, a very harsh, hard, stern husband, who would throw this verse in his wife's face every time, you submit, woman. Nowadays you say woman in that tone, you liable to get slapped. Some of you, how many of you been slapped? No, I'm kidding. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting to the Lord. But there's a boomerang effect. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Children, and he repeats this thing with children again. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. Time and time again, we see this law in light of the New Testament concerning the reciprocal nature of this command. Reciprocal means expressing mutual relationship or action. Something given or performed or felt in return that is equivalent to that which was first given. In other words, if I give love, how you reciprocate that is giving love back, right? You reciprocate it. If we want honor and respect parents, we show, according to the New Testament, we show honor and respect. Husbands, if we want respect from our wives, we better be loving them. Who's Paul talking to? This is where Christianity begins to pull away from the pack, that is the Jews and the Romans, that upholds the authority of the parent. We do not demand blind obedience, but rather respect and honor must be mutual. It must go both ways in order for God to be most pleased. Who's Paul speaking to? In verse 22 through 28 in Ephesians 6, he's talking about wives and husbands. He's talking to wives. He's talking about wives and husbands. Husbands or wives, honor and respect and submit to your husbands as unto the Lord. But husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for the church. You want that level of respect, husbands, you better be loving your wives, and children the same way. He even goes on to relationship between slaves and masters. Slaves, honor your master and work for him as unto the Lord. But masters, you better not abuse your servant. You better treat him, because you need to remember you have a master who is over you. See, if we look at the context of these verses, it's in the spirit of mutual respect and honor that flows from what? A motive to honor God, a motive to honor Christ, reverence for Christ. Submit, it says in verse 21 of Ephesians 5, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. What then becomes the motive for honoring those in authority over us? It is this reverence for Christ. The New Testament principle of the fifth commandment says that I can't fully live in obedience to God without respect and honor for my fellow human beings. Because until our youth learn how to respect and honor others in their human relationships, then they won't be able to properly respect and honor God. As it says in 1 John, if anyone says, I love God, yet hates his brother, he's a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother or respect or honor his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. But if the home or the authority of the parent, who is also represented, I believe, as the elders of our society and our culture, if the home or the authority of the parent or those who are represented as the elders of our society, if that is the training ground where youth learn to live under authority, then does it not stand to reason that they are to know and obey, that they are to learn how to live under authority from us? Does it not stand to reason that if they are to know and obey this command, then the greater burden is placed upon the parent or upon the direct authority or the elder of society to teach them what respect and honor is? And it's not taught in this sense. Come here, boy, I'm going to teach you some respect. I'm going to beat the living daylights out of you. It's not taught by a one-sided action or a one-sided command. It's got to be reciprocated. Does it not beg the question that applies to all of us? What are we teaching our children? What are we teaching our youth? What are we showing them by example? Are we waiting for them to treat us with respect before we treat them with some respect? Do we quickly discredit them and their ideas while at the same time we expect them to immediately accept our wisdom? Now, wait a minute, Pastor. Wait a minute. I thought this sermon was for the kids. Honor your father and your mother. I saw this was coming down the pike. I thought, all right, man, I'm going to get my kid here. The pastor's going to beat him over the head. He's really going to put a guilt trip on him. He's really going to lash out at these kids, say how bad it is. These kids, they're disobeying their parents and disrespecting authority and everything else. All right, Pastor, I thought this was supposed to be for the kids. But it is. You see, we want them to obey this command to show honor and respect, but how can they know what that looks like when we, as adults, as people of authority, elders of society, don't live honorable and respectful lives ourselves at times? You see, the thing we must guard against any time we look at these commands is the tendency to allow our thoughts to take us to someone else first. Oh, pastor's going to be preaching on this, automatically think of somebody else in mind. We need to guard against that. We need to guard against having thoughts of somebody else that might need this message before our thoughts cause us to examine our own hearts before God. You see, if we thought this message was going to be directed toward our rebellious youth of our day, then we're missing the point of God's heart. This command is about learning how to give honor and respect, and how children are taught to give honor and respect for one another and for authority is by what we, parents or elders of society, teach them in our words that are backed up by our actions. Do you want to know how to create a delinquent? You ever thought about that? How do you create a delinquent? There's an article, 12 easy rules to make a child into a delinquent. Begin at infancy to give the child everything he wants. In this way, he will grow up to believe the world owes him a living. Number 2, when he picks up bad language, laugh at him, think it's cute. This will make him think he's funny and cute. Number 3, never give him any spiritual training. Wait until he's 21 and then let him decide for himself. Number 4, avoid the use of the word wrong. It may develop a guilt complex. This will condition him to believe later that when he is arrested for stealing a car, that society is against him and he is being persecuted. Number 5, pick up everything he leaves, and this is an article that was written quite a while ago, so it's he or she. Pick up everything that he or she leaves laying around, books, shoes, clothes. Do everything for them so that they will be experienced in throwing all responsibility on others. Let them read or view any media outlets as they can get their hands on. Be careful that the silverware and drinking glasses are sterilized, but let his mind feast on garbage. Quarrel frequently in the presence of your child. In this way, they won't be too shocked when the home is broken up later. Give a child all the spending money that they want. Never let them earn their own way. Why should they have things as tough as you had them? How many of you made that statement? Oh, I don't want my kid to have to go through what I went through. Satisfy their every craving for food and drink and comfort. See that every sensual desire is gratified. Denial may lead to harmful frustration. Number 10, take his side. Always take his side against neighbors or teachers or policemen. After all, they are prejudiced against your child. My child can't do any wrong. Number 11, when they get into real trouble, apologize for yourself by saying, I never could do anything with them. And then number 12, after all of this, prepare for a life of grief because you will likely have it. 12 easy rules or steps to create a delinquent. You see, I don't think these delinquents in our society are born necessarily that way. I think they pick it up in the training field of the early years of their lives. That's not to erase responsibility. All of us are have free will, and we have the ability to choose. And there have been people who have been brought up in the worst situations, who later on in life somehow God got a hold of them and they came to their senses and they lived a productive life and respect. They learned somewhere along the line how to honor and respect, and that's the point. Somewhere along the line they need to learn honor and respect. We all need to learn honor, respect, because that's the only way we're going to survive as a society, as a culture, or else we'll have complete and total anarchy. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with promise, it says in Ephesians, that it may go well with you, that you may enjoy long life on the earth. But you see, it goes beyond parent-child relationship. It applies to all relationships. This is the first command with promise. It's a command that teaches the principle of the golden rule. What's the golden rule? It's not those who have the gold rule. The golden rule, what is it? Treat others, or do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. Treat others the way you want to be treated. It's a principle that will bless not only our relationship with those in authority over us, as we talked about earlier, do it as unto the Lord, but it will also bless every human relationship that we encounter. Because what we are motivated to reciprocate or to give back is not the equivalent of what was given to us from other human beings. So I tell my kids, I said, don't treat others the way you've been treated. Don't treat others the way you've been treated in the context of a negative sense. Okay? Keep that in context. I mean, that's not the principle. It may work out. Yeah, they treated me good, so I'm going to treat them good back. In principle, but in principle, that is not our motive. We don't treat others the way they treated us. We treat others the way we want to be treated. Or maybe even if we take it a step further, that we reciprocate or give back or treat others the way we've been treated by Christ. What if I reciprocated back or gave back to others what I've been given from Christ? What would society look like? I treat others not so much how they treat me or how I want to be treated, but how I've been treated by Christ. Because sometimes we don't even treat ourselves very well. Right? Sometimes we don't even know how to treat ourselves. But if we're able to grasp first what Christ has done for us, and we use that as the motive for how we treat others, I'm going to love others because I've been loved by Christ. I'm going to treat others with respect and honor because God has respected me and honored me, and He's been gracious to me. I'm going to obey my parents because this is right in the Lord, because God has blessed me. I'm going to respect authority, all authority, because I come under the authority of God to live honorably. You see, this command is not exclusively to children. If anything, if we look at the whole scope of the context in which it's spoken of, including the New Testament, the burden we'll find, as I've been trying to communicate this morning, that the greater burden rests on each of us. Whether we're parents or whether we're elders in society, we have a responsibility to live honorably and respectful lives before this generation, before our young people. And if they turn out disrespectful and as a delinquent, we cannot put all the blame on them. We've got to begin to examine our own lives. But it begins in the home. It begins in the home. And I was thinking about this. One way we teach our kids, one way we teach the younger generation how to respect the most fundamental and basic authority, that is the home, is that we as adults show honor and respect toward those who are not honorable or respectful. We do the Christ-like thing, right? Because while we were in our sins, Christ loved us and He died for us. How many of you have been blessed and touched? I don't think anybody would criticize anybody. Somebody who stands out as somebody who is compassionate and who is kind even and loving even to those who aren't kind and loving. I mean, have you found that those type of persons automatically get people's respect? Maybe you yourself have looked at that and said, wow, man, look at that. That guy was just insulted and he was just put down, but yet his response was gracious. I mean, we look at those type of persons and we're inspired by them. For the most part, I hope. That's the type of people we need to be. We teach honor and respect to to this generation by being people that are honorable and respectful ourselves and showing unconditionally the love of Christ. Amen? Are you with me, adults? Well, Lord, I've been guilty myself, and as I have studied for this message and prepared, there's been several things that I've been convicted about, and how I am in my own relationship with my own kids. Because I have come across at times with my own kids, well, you're going to obey me because I said so. And really there's been times where I failed to stop and consider this whole issue of respect and honor. That at the very least they deserve the respect and honor because they are a human being who's been created in your image. And I need to give them some benefit of the doubt. I need to teach them how to be honorable and respectful by being honorable and respectful myself, by showing honor and respect myself. May you continue to speak to our hearts. May we be reminded this week of this principle from your word, and help us to be people of respect and honor in all the relationships that we encounter this week. I think I told the story once, and I think Chet and Agnes were gone. You guys left. Probably I said something to offend you or something. No, I'm kidding. I was at one of your shows, and I forget what you call it. It's a form of payment, but it deals with trust. Trust card. They have these trust cards. And if you, I guess it would be similar to like an IOU type thing, basically. But if you don't have the proper payment, or maybe you don't have the funds, that you can fill out a trust card, and you get to take the painting home, or not the painting, but the picture home. And some of those paintings, and I mean the range, some of those paintings, I keep wanting to say paintings, some of those pictures aren't cheap. They're, you got some money into, and so you fill out a trust card, and you could take it, and essentially they're going to trust you. And Chet said an amazing, a profound thing to me about that, because I said, man, that's, and he says, sometimes we have to teach trust by actually trusting. Sometimes we talk about, and there's a truth to both sides here. Sometimes when we say trust is broken, it takes time to rebuild trust. It takes time to regain trust from somebody. But sometimes along the way, how we make that person more trustworthy is we go ahead and step out in faith and instill trust, and we actually trust them. Now, there's obviously a balance there, and so don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But I thought that was, in the context of what we're talking about today, the whole idea of what we need to do to train our kids and to train and to teach our this generation, it falls on us. We need to train them and teach them. We need to be, the burden falls on us. Amen.